Good evening and welcome to another episode of The Review, where we discuss in depth the main stories of the day. Now, tonight, we're taking a look at the government's PREVENT programme and their controversial decision to appoint William Shawcross to lead a review on the PREVENT strategy. So what is PREVENT? Now, the government says it's a programme set up in 2003 to prevent people from being drawn into terrorism. Now, it claims to have three objectives: to challenge the ideology that supports terrorism, to protect vulnerable people, and to support sectors at risk of radicalisation. Now, the programme also requires public officials working in education, hospitals and local councils to report any individual showing radical tendencies. My guests tonight are from politics, the legal sector and the Muslim Council of Britain. We also have an author, an academic and a former chairman of the UK-Indonesian Counter-Terrorism Board. So who is William Shawcross? Well, he has worked as a journalist and author, and his views are considered right-leaning. He is a former chairman of the Charity Commission. Now, welcome everybody and thank you so much for participating in this discussion. Of course, to our viewers, we thank you so much and we welcome comments using the hashtag #ICTheReview. But firstly, let's take a look at this short film.
The appointment of the former head of the Charity Commission, William Shawcross, to lead an independent review of PREVENT, the UK's anti-radicalisation programme, has sparked criticism. Among others, the selection has angered civil liberty and Muslim groups, citing Shawcross's Islamophobic remarks in the past.
Europe and Islam is one of the greatest, most terrifying problems of our future, I think. All European countries have very quickly growing Islamic population.
Human rights organisations such as Amnesty International have been calling for an independent review of the already contentious PREVENT programme for some time, saying it fosters discrimination against Muslims. Former senior Muslim officer in the Met Police, Dal Babu, who describes PREVENT as a toxic brand, has condemned the appointment, saying Shawcross is a man who has demonstrated a lack of independence in matters involving the Muslim community. And sadly, this is a missed opportunity to develop an effective programme that safeguards our children. A Home Office spokesperson said there was a full and open recruitment process to find a new independent reviewer, and that a panel led by an independent chair assessed the candidates and found that Mr. Shawcross met the criteria and possessed the right range of skills and experience to conduct this important review. Is William Shawcross the right person to evaluate the government's PREVENT programme? We find out on The Review.
Welcome back. Now, I'd like to start by introducing Dr. Afzal Khan, who is a Labour Party MP for the Manchester Gorton constituency since 2017. Now, Mr. Khan is the first person from a BME background to represent a Manchester constituency in Parliament. Now, in 2008, Afzal was awarded a CBE for his work in the community cohesion, interfaith and local government. I'd also like to introduce Hamda Mohammed, who is a spokesperson for the Muslim Association of Britain. Now, as a recent law graduate, she's been widely involved in organising local and EU-wide campaigns whilst working for numerous organisations. She's passionate about youth development and societal change. And we're also going to have, I believe, we have another guest. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Let me introduce Brother Mozam. So, Brother Mozam, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. So let me introduce, so as everyone knows, Brother Mozam Beg is an activist. He's an author as well, but he's perhaps known for being somebody who's been held at the leisure of the United States government in Guantanamo Bay, of course, unjustly. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My brother Mozam, thank you for joining us, as well as Dr. Afzal Khan and Sister Hamda. Assalamu alaikum to you all.
Wa alaikum.
So we have a development. I think some people may have thought that the PREVENT strategy was dead because COVID has kind of taken, pride of place as kind of the main news story for the past year or so. But it seems that the government has this, I suppose, in their mind, they want to do something PREVENT, and hence they've taken on board William Shawcross. So what's wrong with William Shawcross? That's, I suppose, a question for Brother Mosem.
Bismillah ar-Rahman. Well, look, first of all, let's just get this absolutely crystal clear. William Shawcross is himself a problem, but he's a problem that's come to overlook a problem. And it's essentially something that's unfit for purpose being governed or overseen by somebody who is also unfit for purpose. PREVENT is a failed strategy. It's been described as a toxic brand. It's been described as, by the United Nations, and I quote, that it doesn't stop extremism, it could be promoting extremism. That's in a report by the United Nations, 2016, 2017. And there are so many organizations, individuals, former police officers, and including a Birmingham-based former advisor to PREVENT, Jahan Mahmood, who actually said that PREVENT itself is a poisoned chalice. You have the former director of public prosecutions who said, and I quote, that PREVENT is causing in universities a chilling effect on debate and a deadening effect on research. Now, getting to William Shawcross, so we understand the background of this man. He's somebody that's accused myself. He's actually mentioned me by name and said that Muazzam Beg and Cage are experts in lawfare. What he means by this is that we are very good at taking the government to court for its role in torture and complicity thereof.
But is there anything wrong with that? Because that's true, right? You are experts.
Well, absolutely, absolutely. But for him to say this in a way that is derogatory and say that these people are bad because of it, meaning that, and it sits in lines with his beliefs, because he actually justifies Guantanamo Bay, he justifies waterboarding and torture, and for his background, so you understand, he was one of the founding members of the Henry Jackson Society, of whom the director, a former director rather, Douglas Murray, has said that conditions for Muslims must be made harder across the board. So, now,
so those are quite strong accusations that you said. We just want to understand, what is your evidence for those things about supporting I suppose the ongoing nature of Guantanamo Bay, waterboarding, etc. Where do you get that from?
He's written about this, and this is quoted in The Guardian. He's written a book in which this is quoted. So this isn't something made up. He's justified it based upon the ideas of the war on terrorism. Where neocons in the United States argue that, but it's quite rare to find somebody in the United Kingdom, in Britain, openly kind of defending the position of that. And so we understand where this is all coming from. The Henry Jackson Society that he helped to set up is part of that sort of neocon thing, where as I said, the former director, Douglas Murray, is photographed with a guy called Stephen Bannon smiling together. And Stephen Bannon, so you know, he's one of Trump's former chief advisors, who just a few weeks ago actually called for the beheading of the head of the FBI and the chief medical officer in the United States.
But Mosem, I suppose you have to appreciate William Shawcross is no longer part of the Henry Jackson Society. Those are two different issues. Now he is somebody who was the head of the Charities Commission. He's now moved on to the head of PREVENT. He seems aptly qualified. So do we need to take in his previous position and stance? He may have changed his views. Has anyone approached him and maybe even asked him?
Nothing in the public arena at all to change his views at all. He's in fact said that Islam and Europe are one of the most dangerous, terrifying things facing the entire population of Europe. His position, he's never said anything to rescind or to retract his statement. So we can only base what he has said and take him on his word. We simply cannot say we have to wipe the man's history and start afresh with somebody like that. And based upon the fact that PREVENT, the majority of people that are targeted by PREVENT, again, disproportionately are Muslims, he's the last person you would think that would review something that's as toxic as this.
Thank you, Mosem. We're going to move on. Stay with us. But I'd just like to point out also that Islam Channel has reached out to many people who are supporting the PREVENT programme, but sadly everybody declined to participate in tonight's show. So my role really is to make sure this is a very balanced view about this whole programme. So let's go to Dr. Afzal Khan. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Afzal. Question I have for you is around Home Office data. Now, it showed there are about 6,300 referrals to PREVENT in the year to the 31st of March of last year. Out of that, 697 were deemed a risk of radicalisation, actually were taken on by the government's channel programme for special support. Now, maybe, is this a good thing that some of these people have come to light who otherwise perhaps would have perpetrated maybe some acts of terror in this country?
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me to your program, which is a very important subject as well. Look, you've thrown some figures at me. For me, the key point is, what is it that we're trying to do here? I've been part of the Shadow Home Office team, which has been looking at some of these issues, challenging this idea of PREVENT and what is the best way forward. Of course, the idea that if there is a risk, government has a duty to manage that risk. And therefore, any steps taken in that context, I think we all support, all law-abiding citizens would support that. But any steps which actually take us away from that, we also owe it to the public that we make sure we bring in policies which then allow us to achieve those objectives.
So, may I ask then? Okay.
Let me please finish my point, and then I'm happy to answer your question. So in this particular case, there is a long history of PREVENT, how the PREVENT has been used, and how effective exactly is PREVENT. And we have been pressurizing the government for many, many years. What we are saying to the government is that they need to take a stock of this. And in order to do that, what we need to have is a fair system of looking at PREVENT and to see what are the good points, what are the bad points. Once we've had a look at that as a society, and how can we do that? And that can only happen through making sure that it's done fairly. And in this fairly is the key issue here. That what the governments have been doing for some time now, we do not feel that the way they're going about is actually fair, and therefore calls into account all these steps they're doing. First of all, they've been dragging their feet to have an independent review of the PREVENT. Then we managed to drag them to there. Then they brought in Lord Carlisle. Again, we objected to that. We realized that he was biased. He was coming straight away with an image and a view of a PREVENT agenda. So how can that be fair? Now, after 13 minutes, they've got this gentleman now who also has got a bad history. So for me, the real issue is, what is it the government are trying to do?
Okay, so a question I have for you then, Dr. Khan. So a question I have for you is that you don't seem to be against PREVENT. You perhaps want it to be tweaked. Is that right?
No. I'm not saying that tweak. What I'm saying is, it's right that we should have a look at the whole history of PREVENT and what has happened with PREVENT.
Okay, so but the question, Dr. Khan, is either... I'm asking the question because I've got several other guests I need to get to. I've got a few other questions for you, but I'm just trying to...
You use the word tweak. You use the word tweak. I've never used the word tweak.
No, I'm using the word tweak. It's either you're for the programme or you don't want it at all. But if there's middle ground, then it means that you want to have it adjusted. You're in favour, but you just want to have it adjusted and perhaps, you know, have more of an in-depth, detailed review of it. Which camp would you say you sit in? That's a question I want to ask.
That's right. That's a fair question, I think. Look, the camp I sit in is this, that we've got this long history of PREVENT, and we've now got spectrum of opinions about this, from one end, which is saying this has been totally disaster, to the other end, who are saying this is amazing, it's marvelous, we really need this. And there are many who sit in the middle. They're saying there may be some good things here, but maybe there are some other issues here. So that is why I sit on the middle front, where I'm saying we need to look at this properly, independently, so people have confidence in it, and then the lessons will be before us. Now, whether that then means a wholesale shift of totally getting rid of it, or whether it means just a tweak, as you put it, or something different in between. But that position can only be reached when there is a fair, independent assessment of it. At the moment, we're not getting that. Every time they're bringing a person who has already got an idea what should be. And how can the Muslim community then have any confidence in that system, especially when the individual hasn't even put the hands up and say, look, my past, I accept.
Okay, I'm going to move on
to
our sister Hamda Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Hamda. Now, I know that you are very passionate about youth development work. I suppose the question I have is Prevent funds many different initiatives up and down the country, which pretty much started from their inception back in around 2003. Surely that's a great thing that money is being put into the youth sector, where a lot of great work is happening, that a lot of youth are now being empowered. They're maybe staying away from crime, maybe from radicalisation. Surely that's a good thing in your eyes, correct?
Sadly, it's not. It may appear on the surface that it's a good thing for young people. As Muazzam said before, Prevent is an example of Islamophobia at an institutional level, specifically at universities. It has disproportionately marginalized ethnic minority communities. It means that it's disseminating and normalizing Islamophobia across society, by inscribing its assumptions and prejudices on the structural
That's quite sweeping, sister. That's quite sweeping, because the reason why I say that is that, you know, it's a very wide brushstroke that it's Islamophobia. But my point comes down to the money that's been invested into youth programmes by Prevent surely has helped communities around the country, especially with youth. Would you say that's a fair comment?
I mean, what it does, you might say it's a broad stroke, but the thing is, Muslims have an approximate 1 in 500 chance of being referred to Prevent. That's 40 times more likely than their non-Muslim counterparts. So, for example, if I'm at university and I haven't been practicing prior, and my academics start seeing, for example, that I put on hijab, automatically what they're going to assume is, because of the guidelines under Prevent policy, is that I'm starting to become more radical. I'm just starting to practice my religion. So that since 2015, right up until 2017, Islamist extremists made up about 65% of all referrals, yet only 5% of those referred got specialist help. That just means that the government is storing all the information that it gathers regardless of whether those people get specialist help. So as a young person at university, that's very detrimental to my own well-being, as well as my trust at the institutional level. That's why I say Prevent as a policy institutionally is Islamophobic.
So are you saying that them storing your information, showing concern that, you know, that possibly you could be becoming radicalised, becoming an extremist, you know, surely perhaps from the point of view that they're trying to safeguard society, is that really a bad thing, that they just want to make sure that they're keeping a check on those people that could potentially be a problem for society?
I mean, yes, it is, because what it means, it's deterring a lot of young people, and it's actually doing more harm than good, because rather than acting as a serious counter-terrorism effort, when in regards to like deterring the rise of the far right, unfortunately, Prevent, it does not do that. Instead, what it does, instead of tackling the genuine red flags, it creates more of a crackdown on ideology and political thought. So what it's doing, it's creating a bubble on what's called on policies and potential, and creating sort of people who don't align their thoughts with the government. They are then flagged as potential terrorists. We're not saying that it's based on Islamophobic stereotypes, for example, that the West seems to have. And as you said at the beginning, MAB does work at a grassroots level to ensure that those who are very vulnerable are not left alone, and that they are given the accurate information on Islam, not just the misinterpretations that the far right spreads, or other extremist groups for their own personal gain. So, for example...
So, let me just ask you, has MAB in any way, shape or form taken Prevent funding?
No.
OK. Let me come back to you, because I want to go back to Mozam Beg. Mozam, you still with us?
I'm still with you.
Mozam, okay, question I have to you is, there's no such thing as Islamic terrorism. It doesn't exist, correct?
No such thing as what, sorry?
Islamic terrorism or extremism.
Well, there's terrorism carried out by Muslims, of course, there's no doubt about that. But when you say it's Islamic, it's like saying Islamic pork or Islamic riba, Islamic interest. It's an oxymoron. The two things can't. So we reject those kind of terminologies. We can say Muslims who have carried out acts of violence or political violence. Of course, you can say that. But to connect it to something that is an entire faith is deeply problematic, and that is what PREVENT does. But more above and beyond that, it's really important. We've got to understand this. That what's his name? Khairullah Sadi, who carried out this attack recently in Reading last year. He was already known to the police. In fact, he'd been imprisoned several times, yet he still carried out the attack. Salman Abedi, who carried out the Manchester bombing, he was referred to the police by his mosque. Okay, the best one here, the best one out of all of this to prove how bad PREVENT is, Khurram Butt, who carried out the London Bridge attack in 2018. His brother worked for PREVENT, received £10,000 from the police and the PREVENT service, PREVENT money, in order to begin a de-radicalisation program. He couldn't de-radicalise his own brother.
But then naturally you're going to have people who fall through the net.
But what I'm going to pose this question to the supporters of PREVENT is that they took his passport, I think his family took his passport and so forth, and as a result of him being unable to travel, he carried out his attacks here. So the question is this. They say that PREVENT, one of the successes of PREVENT is that they stopped, I don't know, 100 or so people travelling to Syria. Had this guy travelled abroad, those attacks wouldn't have happened. Put that to the PREVENT people and say how many lives, because this PREVENT is about protecting lives. So you have to ask this question. It's not about these youth programs. It's not about helping this disenfranchised groups. It's about preventing violence. It was always about preventing violence. So the question is, how many lives, actual lives and plots, physical actual plots, has PREVENT been instrumental in saving and protecting? So and there's no data for that at all.
So let's say PREVENT was successful in preventing attack which may have killed tens of people. Let's say, like the Manchester Arena bombing. But if that was prevented, surely PREVENT has done its job and it should be applauded.
But it hasn't done it. That's the point is that
just because you don't know, it doesn't mean it hasn't happened.
Hypothetical, because the problem is that PREVENT has been around, and despite PREVENT, we've got senior police officers saying things like that we are facing the greatest terrorism threat since the IRA. Now, if that's true, then that's evidence of the failure of PREVENT, because he said that many years after PREVENT was implemented, and Britain has had more anti-terror laws passed in the past 20 years than it did at the height of the IRA campaign, during which 3,000 people were killed on the streets of Britain. What does that tell you? It tells you that Britain should know how to deal with terrorism, but it doesn't. And even after every attack, they say that we want to, some people say, right-wing hacks say, that we should reintroduce internment for at least 23,000 Muslim terrorism suspects in the country. Now, we know what internment did in Northern Ireland, but this is all part of the language of people who say that because they're Muslims, we can do away with their rights. Whereas you could never say that for a right-wing, far-right, white extremist terrorists. You couldn't do that. You could never say. There have been a number of plots that have been carried out. Some were successful, some unsuccessful. Okay. They could never say, let's bring in internment for such people.
So, Moza, we'll come back to you on that. What I'd like to just to reiterate again, that for tonight's discussion, we did reach out to many organisations, even some PREVENT-funded organisations and individuals who support PREVENT programme, but sadly we didn't receive any responses from them. But they were most welcome, and we did reach out to many. Let me go to Rizwana Hamid. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you, Rizwana?
Walaikum salam, alhamdulillah, I'm good, thank you.
Alhamdulillah. Now, Rizwana is the director of the MCB Centre for Media Monitoring. She's responsible for seeing the CFMM's work and engaging with key stakeholders. She has over 30 years' experience working in the media and worked as a producer and director for the BBC, news, current affairs, religion, documentaries, world service, multicultural, and for many other broadcasts as well. So we're very, very honoured to have you with us. So Rizwana, so, is it a problem of optics? It seems that what we're hearing is that it's the media is at fault now because they are waving the flag and they are crying Islamic terrorism. Is it really the media now that we need to be reining in here? Are they the cause of the likes of the need for a prevent programme?
I think the media is always part of the narrative because they are the narrative builders. And just like in the 80s, the Prevention of the Terrorism Act was kind of used vindictively against all Irish people, and the media perpetuated that myth. Today, terrorism has become synonymous with Muslims, and by and large, that's a result of the media's framing of terrorism, both in this country and abroad. So I would say that the media is part and parcel of the systemic problem when it comes to prevent, that it's the government, it's the police, it's the media who hand in hand have not questioned. I mean, the media hasn't questioned enough the prevent policies. And in its reporting of terrorism, I mean, we produced a report recently which looked at how the media reported on terrorism. And they referred to Muslims who perpetrated acts of terrorism, and the words Muslim and terrorism appeared 9 times more frequently when the perpetrator of a terrorist attack was a white supremacist or somebody from the far right or neo-Nazi. So you see the media perpetuating this myth of all Muslims are terrorists, or the community is the enemy within and therefore is suspect. So I think prevent is a very kind of toxic Islamophobic brand. The media has bought into the narrative of Muslims are the threat within and reported on terrorism in a very inconsistent way. So, white supremacists are lone wolves, or they're acting without agency or without any, international connections or any ideological connections to organizations, whereas Muslims are always seen as being part of an international organization and more systematic. So I think the approach to how the media looks at terrorism is very skewed.
Rizwana, thank you for that. We're going to come back to you again, but first we're going to go and take a short break, and we'll see you in 5. Welcome back to The Review, where our panel is discussing the government's Prevent programme and the suitability of William Shawcross to lead a review. And welcome back to you all. So we've had a break, and I'm hoping that we've had enough time to be able to gauge our thoughts here. Now, going back to you, Rizwana, we're talking about the way in which media reports on crimes, reports on events. And what you're saying is there seems to be a different way in which acts perpetrated by Muslims are reported as opposed to anybody else, as you mentioned, the far right. Surely we have a responsibility as a community to behave. So really, is the media at fault here? Or should be really looking deep within ourselves, within our community, to try and rectify it and maybe change the way and perhaps we react to certain situations?
To me, it's about consistency when it comes to the media. So, if you're reporting on what you have defined as terrorism or an act of terrorism, then be consistent in the way that you report it. That's not to say that we're denying that so-called Muslims can carry out acts of terrorism and they shouldn't be reported on or shouldn't be called out. That's not the point. The point is the media being consistent and responsible in how it reports on terrorism. I mean, we've got examples where, you see clearly there was the example of Matthew Glynn, I think, in 2015, who was caught with bomb-making equipment in his home. neither was he called a terrorist in the media, nor was he charged or prosecuted with terrorism. There's many examples. For example, the media says, "Oh, we always follow the lead of the authorities," for example. And just last year, we did a comparison of the Streatham London Bridge attacks with an attack that was committed in Hanau in Germany. The London Bridge and Streatham the perpetrators were, I say so-called Muslims, but, they identified themselves as Muslims. And the one in Germany was by a far right. And in Germany, the authorities came out very quickly and said that this was being investigated by the counter-terrorism police. Not a single one of the British media used the word terrorism or terrorist within, their reporting of this event, even though the authorities had labelled it as such. Whereas, with Streatham or London Bridge, there were about 102 headlines that used the words terrorism. So it's not about holding, people to account when they've committed crimes. It's about being consistent in how you report them.
So you're saying that the way media reports impacts perception across the whole of society?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, there's studies been done.
So I'll come back to you, Rizwana. Going back to Dr. Afzal. Dr. Afzal, a question I have for you is around the tragic incidents that happened in Manchester with the Manchester Arena bombing. Now, in terms of the feeling and the atmosphere within Manchester since that time, do you find that a lot more people are now wanting to or will support a programme like PREVENT?
Can I just make a quick point on media, and then I'll answer your question,
Sure.
if you don't mind. I think it's clearly there's an issue with media, and we in the Parliament, we have an APPG, which has been working on looking at religion and media. How does media actually tackle with that? And hopefully very soon that report will be there in public domain. But there is an issue. I mean, I just shared with you my own son. We were traveling together in a car, and then there was an item of some incident. And immediately in my mind and my discussion with my son was, I hope this is not a Muslim. And that was because of part of the history and what happened and the backlash and everything. And interestingly, my son immediately said, this is not a Muslim. So I said, how do you know? Just listening to this news, I was concerned, and you knew that this is not a Muslim. And his reply was, I can tell from the way they're reporting this news. So a young man actually can tell the difference in a news. Who is the person who's done this? So this is sad. This is really bad.
Just taking you on that point, surely the reaction of maybe yourself and your son of, oh no, not again, doesn't that itself tell you that there is a problem?
Yes, it is. And I agree with that. But to me, the interesting point was the next bit, that he was able to identify the behavior and the way the news was being given, that the person is not a Muslim. And that tells me there is a huge problem here with the media.
Okay.
And therefore, I agree with Rizwana. Now, the question you asked, look, I think Manchester is an amazing city. You'd say that because I was a former Lord Mayor of Manchester. But I honestly mean this. I've seen when these incidents happen, that how they actually come together. I remember I was one of the candidates in the election during that period, and my fear was, will there be a huge backlash against me? But the Mancunians' actually reaction was totally different. I had the biggest majority in the history of Manchester. And my voters are not all Muslim. There is a sizable Muslim, but the majority are actually non-Muslim. So that, I think, shows you the attitude within the Manchester, the relationship is different. But that also takes you to the wider point, and that is wherever the relationships are strong, wherever there is interaction between us, then the ability to absorb this and the ability to show solidarity actually increases.
So just going back on that point, if you were to hypothetically take a vote in Manchester, obviously post the arena bombing, for the PREVENT programme, do you feel that there are going to be more people for it than against it?
PREVENT?
Yes.
I'm not sure. I think the likelihood is people probably will support it. But I think the way forward is truly having a proper independent assessment of this. This way it satisfies both sides, because we clearly have polarized situation here. There are many, particularly in the Muslim community, who feel the impact of the prevent, and they feel that actually disproportionately causes harm. But I think as a whole, as a society, in order to pull it together, it requires independent. And this is why I feel so angry with the current government, that again and again, they're actually missing the central point. And what they're trying to do is engineer a result, which in their opinion is right. That is not the way forward. There has to be a proper independent review.
OK, so if we go back to Sister Hamda, Sister Hamda, a question I have as a young person like myself, you clearly have the interest of the youth at heart here. So the question I have for you is, do you feel that there is no merit whatsoever in prevent? If there wasn't prevent, what would you be hoping would be in its place? What do you feel would perhaps be an effective strategy and something which would really help you in your role of being able to motivate and inspire the youth to stay away from these heinous acts?
Yeah, so yes, you are a very young person, so welcome to the group. But in terms of young people, so what the government has done, it's in the past decade and since prevent, it's alienated organizations on the ground such as MAB, and by cutting essential public services that are lifeline to many communities, especially young people, what it does, it's only emphasizing radicalization. It's not really mitigating anything whatsoever, because like I said, if I go back to the statistic that I used, only 5 people that are referred to prevent get specialist help. So this means that the government isn't actually tackling the root cause. It's more just putting a bandage on top of something. So what it needs to be doing, in fact, is actually working alongside grassroots organizations such as ourselves, scrapping altogether prevent, because prevent cannot be reformed or fixed. It's fundamentally flawed. And by actually scrapping prevent, it allows organizations such as myself and many others to come to the table and help young people. As you can see, COVID-19 has predominantly affected young people in terms of job market, their mental health and anxiety levels going skyrocketing. So what the government needs to do is actually use this particular predicament and actually review, rather than appointing William being the lead for prevent. So what that means is that as young people, we need to be at the forefront of conversations such as this, because if the government is concerned for our well-being, should it not hear from us rather than stigmatizing us?
So, OK, so what as MEB are you doing to help that conversation along, to get your point of view across to prevent and those the powers that be, in order to try and either shape the agenda or put a nail in its coffin, so to speak?
So what we do as MAB is we have a lot of campaigns. Our youth department, the Muslim Association of Britain Youth, which is called MABI, works alongside many organisations such as CAGE, MEND and FOSTA, who advocate for people on an institutional level and give them the resources they need to not only know about Islam in sort of da'wah work, but also making sure that they are able to contribute to society positively. So because we're on the ground and our young people are on the ground, they have other young people to talk to in those instances. So if they ever do fall into the trap of becoming radicalized, they have another person to actually talk to that about, rather than going to organizations or the government who, one, they actually do not trust or think that the government can help or any council can help. So what in fact what we should be doing is working with organizations from the get-go, rather than sort of alienating young people from the conversation. So,
OK, I've got a difficult question, I think. Maybe it's an easy one for you to answer. But what if you, through your youth work and in your conversations with people that you've come across, find that there is individuals who are saying things which are worrying you, they are concerning, and you feel actually, there could be something very bad that could come off the back of this. You're not sure, whether that's the case or not. But perhaps maybe some things that they're articulating or how they're feeling or the views they're expressing are a cause for concern. What would you do, or what do you feel would be the best course of action then, say, for example, if the PREVENT programme wasn't there?
It's very simple: professional help, not counterterrorism. Because what that does, if you, for example, I'm a teacher, I see, for the example that I gave earlier, in terms of a young person who's not practicing, who puts on a hijab or starts praying or starts outwardly showing that they're becoming more practicing, under the PREVENT guidelines, for me, there's only a very limited sort of scope in what I can sort of look towards. And if that young person is ticking all those boxes, they're getting referred to PREVENT. When in fact, instead of referring them to PREVENT, all I could have done is, one, gotten an imam, gotten a young person who is in that deen or is in that circle who talks like them, and got that young individual professional help. It's starting a conversation rather than stigmatizing the individual for what change they're going through. It's all about humanization rather than anything.
So shouldn't that individual be on the police radar, for example?
I'm gonna put that back on you. Why?
Well, if somebody is exhibiting maybe some views which could lead to an issue, yes, you can give some professional help, but it doesn't necessarily mean that professional help is going to be effective. Should they be somebody who is then monitored for a period of time just to see how they're getting along, for example?
So monitoring isn't actually getting to the heart of the cause. It doesn't actually look at the root cause of what that young person is either thinking or whatnot. We live in a democracy. So freedom of speech. Earlier, I said that if I, for example, do not agree with the government, that in of itself, the policies that I do not agree with the government in of itself means that I'm a potential terrorist. Or anything outlandish that I do say puts me on the surveillance of the state, which in fact isn't actually going to do any good, because counterterrorism isn't effective, full stop.
Thank you, Hamda. OK, so I'd like to ask perhaps the same question to Sister Rizwana. Rizwana, question I have for you, being somebody who is really at the forefront of evaluating news, the media, and I suppose I know that there's going to be a report coming out very shortly, which really which goes into a lot of detail around this very topic, this area. A question for you is what would you say needs to happen? Do you feel that there should be no PREVENT programme whatsoever? Do you feel there needs to be some iteration of a PREVENT programme? If there isn't a programme of any shape or form, then in your mind, if you were to come across somebody who had views that didn't sit well and you thought, OK, this is cause for concern, in your mind, what should happen next? What would you do?
I mean, I think as an individual, or as an organisation, I'd have two different responses to that. But the question is not what you do with those people, because you're looking at the end result. And, if you're asking me, OK, if you can clearly see that somebody's going to do something, do you inform them to the police or whatever? But that requires a level of trust from the community to work with the government and the police. And I don't think there is that level of trust to do that. The Muslim Council of Britain's done a national listening exercise whereby they've gone up and down the country speaking to communities, different organisations within the Muslim communities, to look at their response to the counterterrorism policies, but also the impact that it's had on communities. Now, the impact that it's had as a result of criminalising whole communities as a result of the actions of individuals has meant that the trust isn't there to work alongside government and police in terms of informing on whoever it is, whether it's a member of the family or, it may be somebody in the community. So I think it's a question of, it's a very moral question, actually. What do you do? What do you do if you're a mother, for example, and you find, I don't know, a knife in the home that you think that your son possesses? Does your instinct as a mother come in and you go down what Hamda was talking about talking to your son, about trying to get to the root cause of it, or do you immediately hand them over to the police and you know that they're going to be locked up and criminalized without looking at the root causes? I think until society as a whole looks at the socioeconomic influences of what leads some young people who are part and parcel of this society to go down a route of taking up, violent means in terms of tackling various problems.
Okay.
We're not, the kind of reporting of people may resolve part of it, but it won't stop the next person doing it, or the person after that, because there's systemic problems that exist.
So, Rizwana, would you mind telling us, there is a report coming out very shortly. Can you tell us when that's expected?
Yeah, so it'll be released in March, inshallah, probably at the end of February, but March more likely. And it'll be a very, very comprehensive report, which will kind of not only look at what Muslim communities have said, it's going to look at the whole counterterrorism policy, stats and data that's been released by the Home Office. But also, we've done lots of surveys, focus groups, interviews, and it gives a very interesting insight in terms of what the Muslim communities around Britain think of the PREVENT strategy.
Thank you so much, Rizwana. Much appreciated. I'd like to ask a similar question actually to Dr. Afzal Khan. Dr. Afzal, a question to you is, if you feel that PREVENT is perhaps not the best mechanism for, it's not fit for purpose, what should be there in its place?
Yeah, well, first of all, we look forward to the MCB's report in March. I think that will be a good addition to this whole debate. Currently, with what is happening, I am not satisfied, and I've already written to the Home Secretary that we need some questions on the way they've arrived at William Shawcross as a person. What sort of process have they gone through? What sort of consultation have they done within the organization, within the country, the Muslim organization included? And furthermore, with his history in the background, what sort of understanding have they developed with that before they got into this conclusion? Now, I think, sensible way forward is for a proper independent review of this. And if that review looks at the totality of this journey and with what is happening, with the PREVENT currently, the impact it's having in the society as a whole, impact it's having on the Muslim community, impact that is having our professional bodies as education, a health service, other organizations like that, instead of letting them do their job, they're being distracted, put in this direction. So all that needs to be actually weighed up. And then ultimately they will make some recommendations. And through that, I think we need to look forward. Because let's not forget one thing. And that is, it's the duty of the government to protect every single citizen in this country. That we have obligation. But we can't do that duty in the wrong way where it makes things worse. And therefore, the government must do proper listening and then move forward with the proper policies.
Thank you for that, Dr. Afzal. And finally to Mohsen Beg. Mohsen, you're clearly not a fan of William Shawcross. I can't see him being on your Eid card list this year. There's no smoke without fire, so to speak. There seems to be an issue around terrorism, which is perpetrated by people who claim to be doing it in the name of Islam. If not PREVENT, then what should be in its place, Mohsen?
The replacement for PREVENT, first of all, is to scrap it, and that is because it is a failure, and it's an abject failure that's been recognised right across the board from, as I said, former PREVENT officers, former police officers. Andy Burnham, we spoke about Manchester. Andy Burnham, actually, before the attacks, he actually described PREVENT as akin to internment without trial, because you were essentially using pre-crime judgment on people without any evidence that they have carried out, or that without any evidence at all against those people. And as I said, the United Nations report, if there was anything as damning as that has said it isn't stop extremism, it could be PREVENT could be a cause of extremism. That in itself, that statement alone, should be enough for it not to be reviewed, but for it to be scrapped. And as I said, with the question about how many lives has Prevent actually saved, the answer is that there is no data. There's nobody that can say they've saved X amount of lives. So the first thing is it should be scrapped. The second thing is that we should look at the root causes. And it's most important. We know we've been here before because Prevent came about as a result or shortly after the July the 7th bombings. And the attackers, the killers, the murderers or terrorists, whatever you want to call them, left a video saying why they did it. And they said they did it because of Britain's role in Iraq and Afghanistan, where millions of people were killed, literally, with the involvement of the British and so forth. None of that's addressed at all. And if you don't look at that, we're not saying that's the only thing, but that is a major thing that has caused it. And only when you get to the root of that, because it's not just external policy or foreign policy, it's also internal policy where Muslims are targeted. We've recognized that Prevent is very much part of that structural Islamophobia. Almost every year, a new anti-terror law is passed. They try to, that almost exclusively targets Muslims. They don't say this is a Muslim law, but almost exclusively they're applied to Muslims. In 2001, Muslims were detained here, 16 North African and Middle Eastern men, without charge or trial. In Britain, not Burma, not Guantanamo, but Britain. In London, Belmarsh, without charge or trial in the land of habeas corpus and Magna Carta. Why? Under emergency terror legislation. Not a single one of them was convicted for a crime. The House of Lords ruled in 2005, after 3 years of imprisonment here as high-security prisoners, that their imprisonment had been unconstitutional, i.e. unlawful. Did that make a hoot of a difference? No. Laws kept on being passed in this country that targeted Muslims. So there's no point of doing more of the same. In spite of all of these laws and wars on terror, we still say that we are less safe. That means they're an entire failure. So you've got to go back to the drawing board, scrap Prevent, look at what you're doing with the community, build with them, as Majda was talking about, talk to grassroots people, decouple safeguarding from counter-terrorism policy, because there are places where safeguarding exists. Prevent, the idea about it made sense because you want to stop violence. But this is no longer about stopping violence. This is about policing thought. And just so that you understand, we've been talking about Manchester quite a bit. The former head of Greater Manchester Police, Sir Peter Fahy, actually said that I fear my own police officers are going to be made into thought police. And that's where Prevent has been taking us. Okay. So you can already find a solution with this. And the final thing I would say, I've been dealing with scores, in fact, probably hundreds of people that I've dealt with who might have considered joining ISIS or joining a terrorist group. Me as Moazzam Beg, as a former Guantanamo Bay prisoner, as somebody who's been in Syria, as somebody who's been in prison in Belmarsh, as somebody who's attacked by the state because I oppose Prevent, I am far more credible than William Shawcross or the entire Home Office. And everybody in that stream knows it. And that's one of the reasons why they'll target you, because they know you're far more credible than anything they can present.
Absolutely. Thank you, Moazzam, for that. I'd like to thank Sister Rizwana, Sister Hamda, Dr. Afzal Khan, of course, Moazzam Beg, for taking part in the first part of the show. Just to reiterate that we did reach out to individuals and organisations who support the Prevent programme, but sadly we didn't hear back from anybody that we had contacted. But thank you to my guests. We're going to a short break, but we'll be back soon. Welcome back to The Review, where our panel is discussing the government announcement that they are appointing William Shawcross as the new independent reviewer of Prevent. Now, my next guest is Dr. Rob Walker, who is a senior researcher on the Influencing Corridors of Power project at SOAS, University of London. He's been lobbying against Prevent since seeing its negative impact on relationships between teachers and students while working as a teacher in East London. He's just finished writing a book on the emergence of extremism that will be published later this year. Great to have you with us, Dr. Rob Walker. I'd also like to introduce Dr. Musharraf Hussain. He's the former chairman of the UK-Indonesian Counter-Terrorism Board. He is now the chief executive of the Karimiyah Institute Nottingham and author and chief editor of The Invitation, which is a Muslim family magazine. Great to have you with us, Dr. Musharraf. We have Yasmin Qureshi MP, who is a member of Parliament for the constituency of Bolton South East. Now, Yasmin is currently the Shadow Minister in International Development. She's also also a barrister practicing criminal law. She's headed the criminal legal section of the UN mission in Kosovo and was later appointed director of the Department of Judicial Administration. Great to have you with us as well. And of course, our final guest is Dr. Soraya B. Now, she completed her human sciences degree at Magdalen College at the University of Oxford, during which she received a scholarship to study at Stanford University's Sophomore College. She then completed her MA at School of Oriental and African Studies, after which she pursued a PhD at the University College London, and the final year of her PhD was at Yale University Department of Anthropology. Now, she's currently teaching, lecturing at the School of Oriental African Studies, and in Edinburgh she's a Deputy Programme Director for Social Research, and she's founded and she's the Chief Editor of the Journal of British Muslim Studies. Wow, mashallah, assalamu alaikum. Great to have you all with us. Thank you so much, it is an honour. So we're talking about PREVENT. First and foremost, I'd like to go to Yasmin Qureshi. Now, you are a representative of Labour. How did you feel? What was your initial reaction when your party, which was the government at the time, announced this amazing new initiative called PREVENT? Were you in favour?
No, I wasn't in favour of it, and I was quite critical of it. The only difference between then and when the Conservative government came in is that under Labour, the PREVENT policy was optional. You didn't have to do it, and there was no kind of legal repercussions or penalties if you didn't pursue it. And it wasn't put on the statute book in its legal regulatory form, which sadly, when the Conservative came into power, they have. And that is where now all these onus is on teachers and doctors and everybody to spy on their patients or their students. And if they don't do so, there are legal possible repercussions of it. So they put it on a statutory basis, which has made it even worse. But no, I wasn't impressed with my party initially introducing it. Now, the reason I'm against it, and I think this is important, it was a point I think somebody earlier made in the introduction, which is that we have to recognize that there is a problem of radicalization and extremism, not just amongst Muslims, but in different groups of people, white race, white supremacists, all sorts of. And I think what's important is that at schools and colleges, where you have young minds, young people, that need to be taught all together about the possible danger that they might find themselves into, and especially the dangers on the social media sphere, the internet. And, because I think it's been shown in a lot of radicalization, whether it's far right or any other, that most of it happens on the internet, on the sort of, channels they've been watching. And I think we, all of us in this country and others, have got to recognize that there are dangers out there for our young children and our young people. And we need to confront that. We need to do it together as a group. And that's not what PREVENT does. It signals out people. And, I've heard of some appalling examples where just because somebody started wearing a headscarf because they came back from Saudi Arabia after doing UMRAH, suddenly, PREVENT measures start coming into being. So for that perspective, I think, in my view, the way it's being done is wrong.
So a question I have for you then, if you're saying that you're against it, then what did you do at the time to lobby against it? What practical steps did you take? Did you speak to the powers that be? Did you speak to Blair and say, excuse me, Prime Minister, but I'm not quite on board with this?
Well, I was a small cog in the wheel at that time. I wasn't an MP. I was just, an active Labour Party member. But I did pass my message on to Hazel Blair, who was then the CCLG, and other people. And I openly, in meetings and discussions, said that this wasn't a good idea. But unfortunately, because we had the September 11th happen and the July incident, it was quite a hard thing to kind of fight against. because I just felt that, because, you know, there were these youngsters born and bred in this country who clearly had been radicalised to commit, the July one.
So,
but,
okay,
so
if I come back to you, but maybe leave you this thought, because it sounds like you're actually for something, or you're in agreement with a programme like PREVENT, but you just seem to want it maybe relooked, revisited, and maybe tweaked in some way, shape or form.
I think I don't like the first word PREVENT. Secondly, I don't like the way it's being implemented. Thirdly, it's a statutory format. What I believe in, that there is a scope for good education, but in the schoolroom, in the colleges here, for everybody, whether you're white, black, Muslim, Christian, any faith. I think everybody together, because I think young people are being subjected to a lot of negative thinking and a lot of negative thoughts. And I think they all need to be looked at, whether it's in terms of sexual harassment, whether it's, this. That's what I think. So my difference is the fact that there is dangers out there for everybody. You know, there was a statistic done, how many young girls have been sexually assaulted by other young males, from their peer group in schools. So there's a lot of things that need to be addressed in our society.
Okay.
And we need to do it properly and comprehensively.
We'll come to that point, because there's something I'd like you to expand upon. I'll come back to you on that. If we go to Dr. Musharraf Hussain. Dr. Musharraf, what do you understand were the original aims of the PREVENT programme? Can you maybe take us back and help us understand the reason for why it exists in the first place?
Well, when the PREVENT came out, I thought it was needed. Because there was extremism. There is extremism in the Muslim community. Radicalisation was happening. There is a huge mistrust of the statutory bodies of the country we live in, sadly. I think we've got to admit some truths. So there was a need for, but it was very different from what it is now. Now it has morphed into, sadly, almost an agency that is there to monitor. And as Mozambique was saying, it's about even the police fear that they are becoming thought police. And that is where, and I've seen, in our own nursery, when children, as old as 4 and 5, if they, say something, they are deemed as, or their parents are deemed as extremists. And that's a nonsense. And so I have actually now really realized that it's very different from what it started off. Let's be honest. It's very different from what it started off as. Things have now changed drastically. It needs complete overhaul. There is no need for this nonsensical, and I would say it's uncharacteristic of a democracy that, a community is targeted, not a small community of 200,000, 4 million plus, and a community that is the youngest, that is contributing highly to this country, and that is the most law-abiding community. There is no reason for the government to be so scared.
So, Dr. Musharraf, knowing how the government has acted in the past when it comes to the issue of the Muslim community, when it comes to kind of the enforcement and regulation of this community in general, surely you did you really feel the PREVENT programme was an honest project of really looking into protecting protecting the citizens of the UK?
Yes, my upbringing as a Muslim has been that you trust your authorities, you work along with, as long as you don't have real evidence, you have to work with them.
Okay,
so, yes,
but we're also reminded, Dr. Musharraf,
it is genuine.
that a Muslim is never.
I believe it isn't.
A Muslim is never stung from the same hole twice. So surely your upbringing will also help you understand that that the British government for decades have a policy of not being very clear on their intention.
Well, no, I don't actually agree with. I don't accept that kind of ideas. I think you need to have evidence, because you can't read intentions. All right. So now we do have evidence that Prevent it has got bad intentions now. The evidence is there. You see it. So I think until you have evidence, you shouldn't be doubting your government's authority and like that. I think I say that is the mission, and that is the way I think we as Muslims have always behaved and will always behave. I think we need to trust. We're in a business of, certainly as an imam, I'm in a business of building trust. And the Prophet ﷺ was called Al-Amin by his bitterest enemies. We have to develop this trust. We have to recognize that there are extremists, there are problems, and we want to solve those. We want to tackle those. I'll tell you, in Nottinghamshire, we have done that, and it's been successful. We are almost same as, say, Derbyshire, but the extremist problems are very small compared to Derby. Why? Because there was a concerted effort by the Muslim leadership, not for 2 years, but for last 3 decades. I have my other colleagues, my other imams, we have all worked to make sure that we uproot radicalization and extremism. It's worked.
Okay, we're going to come back to you on the work that's been done in Nottinghamshire, and maybe you can give us more information around why you feel it's been successful. If we go to Dr. Rob Full-Walker. Hi, Dr. Rob, if that's okay, if I may call you that. So you're a staunch opponent of the PREVENT programme. So do you feel that in order to try and safeguard society in some way, shape or form, to at least minimise the risk of potential harm to society, that using institutions like schools and colleges, universities, etc., is a legitimate platform in order to, I suppose, operate this programme from?
Yeah, so let me answer that in two ways. The first point is on safeguarding, and the most important thing to point out is that PREVENT categorically and demonstrably is not a safeguarding strategy. Now, let me explain that. Every single safeguarding policy that is in place in a school, and I'm talking about this as someone who's been ahead of a year in 2 comprehensive schools in London, every single safeguarding strategy that is in place that PREVENT claims to cover would be covered anyway. Any time that any teacher or any adult in a school has a concern, a safeguarding issue about a kid, they would escalate it as a safeguarding issue. So PREVENT doesn't help safeguarding in that sense. The same is the case within hospitals. The same is the case within higher education. So PREVENT's not a safeguarding issue, a safeguarding policy. That was tagged on. PREVENT was never talked about as safeguarding until the Home Office started losing the argument about PREVENT being racist. And then they suddenly came out and go, whoa, this is safeguarding. So that was tagged on later. So that's my first point, that PREVENT's not a safeguarding strategy. The next point is on extremism, and there seems to be an agreement from Musharraf and from Yasmin that radicalisation and extremism are a problem. Perhaps they are a problem, but we need to be aware that is a very new and an invented or a constructed problem. Let me explain that. If you look at, say, newspaper articles, if you look at political speeches around the time of 9/11, you won't find the words extremism or radicalisation mentioned. However, they do appear in political speeches throughout the 20th century, before that, within the British Parliament. And extremism has a very specific meaning. Extremism means that people will, when social justice is not delivered, politicians talk about extremism rising, which means that people will vote out the government. So to invent a counter-extremism strategy or any form of legislation against extremism is it's a hugely dictatorial move, and it is absolutely anti-democratic. And let me just add to that slightly. We should be creating a more cohesive society with our schools, with our hospitals. And the way that you do that is by having professional teachers who are not tasked to be counter-terrorist professionals. And just to give you a couple of examples of how that works, from my time as a teacher, it wasn't unheard of, that it happened a few times, that I had conversations with young Muslim men or old Muslim boys, whatever you want to describe sixth formers as, who, this is going back kind of 10, 15 years, who were talking about going to travel to Afghanistan or wherever else to take part in the violent conflicts. Now, every time I had that conversation with those kids, they then found out that I was also opposed to the war and terror. I questioned the legitimacy of the invasion of Iraq, etc., etc. And they then realised that they were part of a democratic society, and they ended up writing to their MPs or taking part in legitimate protests instead of travelling abroad. So that, to me, is what counter-extremism should look like. The problem with a strategy like PREVENT, any form of counter-terrorism strategy that goes into a classroom, it disincentivizes those kids from having those conversations. And this is well documented, that the chilling effect of free speech by PREVENT that silences those kind of conversations, which are the very conversations that those people need to be having to actually be safeguarded. So coming back to my first point, so PREVENT not only is not a safeguarding strategy, it is actively undermining the possibility of safeguarding in schools and hospitals and anywhere else where it is enacted.
OK, no, thank you for that, Dr. Walker. Going to Dr. Sarabia. Dr. Sarabia, a question I have for you. So we've heard from our other guests who, talking about their own personal experiences on whether, or, their feelings towards this whole PREVENT strategy. Is the problem, obviously this has come about because of the appointment of William Shawcross. Is William Shawcross the issue or is PREVENT the issue? What is it exactly, in your opinion? So we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, yes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. This is a great question. I think taking both questions step by one at a time, the problem with William Shawcross is that he has a legacy, and that legacy has some meaning in the independent review that he's been pointed on. And that is problematic because in the past he's claimed that European Islam is one of the greatest, most terrifying problems of our future. And I think all European countries have vastly, very quickly growing Islamic populations. Now, when you have someone like that with such terrifying views and who is terrified of Islam and Muslims leading an independent review, that review is compromised, that review is no longer independent, and what that does is it's alienating and creating distrust amongst Muslims with the government, with political processes and independent reviews. I mean, that's alienating, as the Imam said earlier, 4 million people. Now, the second part of PREVENT is, I really want to highlight the culture that PREVENT has instilled since its onset. And it's this culture that's really problematic. And I want to come at this part of my answer in a three-pronged way. The first of which is I conducted a study with students at a Trojan Horse Affair school. And it's the only study that looks at the experiences of students. Now, the students at that school, one of the schools, said that they always had the media around them, inside school, outside school. They felt that they could no longer be Muslim in the school because of the way the culture changed at the school. I also have conducted research into employment experiences of both Muslim men and Muslim women, the latter of which has been published, the former of which is going to be published in the coming months. And what I'm finding is a high level of Islamophobia in the workplace. And women saying that their colleagues are threatening to burn their headscarves before they leave the classroom or before they leave the workplace at the end of the day, so they no longer have to wear the headscarf. Now, when you've got a person of position and authority, similar to Boris Johnson, who made the comment about burqas and letterboxes, Islamophobia rises incredibly. Now, when you've got someone like William Shawcross, who is in the position that he's been appointed to, making the comments that he has and been provided the position that he has now been appointed on, it normalizes Islamophobia. It normalizes the position of the culture of PREVENT, treating everyone as suspect citizens. And that is the culture that I think is extremely dangerous. And at a later point in this discussion, I also want to talk about a personal experience that I've had where I was discriminated against in the workplace because I raised a concern of 9/11 video being shown to 11-year-old kids there's an 18 rating caution message at the beginning of the video, and I was dismissed for raising the concern because I was visibly Muslim, and I was taken to be complaining. I was understood to be complaining of not wanting 9/11 to be taught in the curriculum.
Okay.
That wasn't the point.
We'll come to that. That's a very good point. So do remind me.
One thing I would highlight before you go on is it's the culture of PREVENT that we also need to look at.
Okay.
It's not the statutory PREVENT guidelines. It's the culture that is now widespread.
So a question I have for you. So everyone is taking issue with William Shawcross. Have you reached out to him, or have you tried to find out at least what his views are now? Maybe they've changed.
That's something that we're currently in the process of doing at the moment. I think, but at the end of the day, I'm of the view that if you've said something and you're an ex-chair of the Henry Jackson Society, that's not something to take lightly. We all know the position of Henry Jackson Society.
But he's no longer the current chair; he's a former chair. But people can change.
He's contributed to the culture of the Henry Jackson Society and to what it is today. That cannot be. That's something that we cannot take lightly. Henry Jackson Society is extremely critical and oppressive to Muslims in this country today. He's built that legacy. He's built that organisation which contributes to the view of the majority of the population today that they have on Muslims today. And I think that's something that we cannot take lightly. As I mentioned in my very first point, this review can no longer be claimed as independent. The independent part of the review is out the window. We cannot believe that this review is independent.
Dr. Surayat, thank you for that. We're going to come back to all our guests, but what we're going to do now is, again, we're going to take another short break. But please do stay with us. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back to the preview. Now, just as a reminder, we did try to contact representatives of the Home Office and William Shawcross to invite them to take part in the show, but sadly, we did not receive a response. So going back to the discussion we have with us, Yasmin Qureshi MP. Yasmin Qureshi, question I have for you. Now, as we mentioned earlier, it was the Labour government that introduced this rather controversial programme. It sounds that you are in favour of it to some extent, or a flavour of it. Would I be right in saying that?
I am in favour of recognising, which we must recognise, that young people especially are very vulnerable, and not just young people, and that there needs to be kind of education in schools and colleges for all young people about different types of radicalisation that is taking place. And I think that, recognising the fact that this is a problem, telling people that these are things to watch out for, and sort of having a counter-argument being presented to the students, to people, is what is required.
So in what form does that take exactly? Practically, how do you envisage that taking place?
Well, that would be, in schools. For example, they have citizenship classes. Now they're having more other classes on, care issues. I think that they can start talking to young people in school together. The teachers actually, maybe once in a month or something, or once in a couple of weeks, actually talking about dangers of online, discussing big political issues of the day. If it's, youngsters in a simple format, teaching them about history and education, or a more holistic approach. And I think that can be done at schools, colleges and universities.
If I might ask, being a Member of Parliament for Labour, what is Sir Keir Starmer's view on the PREVENT programme? If he, for example, tomorrow he was elected as Prime Minister, do you feel that he would have a continuation of that? Would he want to scrap it? Would he want some iteration of it? What would be your recommendation to Sir Keir Starmer?
Well, the Labour Party is looking at a lot of things, and there's reviews taking place about a number of different issues. But as you say, under Labour, it was very different in the way it was. It was voluntary. It was much more ad hoc. But when the Conservatives came in, it became on a statutory footing. And I'm well on record in Parliament talking about that this was not the right way to go forward.
Okay.
And as for what's the future, well, as the Labour Party is reviewing a number of things and policies, and they will be having discussions. This will be, I'm sure, one of the topics that's going to be discussed in due course, I'm sure. I mean, I haven't discussed it at the moment, but, you know, I'm sure it's going to be part of policy, a number of things.
Thank you for that. Really appreciate that. If we go back to Dr. Surya B. Dr. Surya, we're hearing, I suppose, different views. I'm not hearing anything apart from maybe yourself and maybe from Dr. Rob, that, you know, this is a bad idea. I'm hearing that actually we need something, but a flavour of. Now, question I have for you, you say that there are people you've come across who within the workplace, maybe within university life or, you know, within education, who feel they're being othered. Do you think that's really just as a result of what happened on 9/11 rather than what, you know, the PREVENT programme itself? Is it down to an act which was, you know, which was perpetrated by Islamic terrorists in New York City, or is it down to this programme which was conceptualised by the government in 2003?
I don't think it's a simple yes or no to that. I don't think it's an only 9/11 matter. I think it's widely known that Muslims have been otherized and victimized after 9/11. But also, I think it's the onset of 9/11 that has then triggered government policies all around the world, not only in the UK and other parts of Europe as well, and America, which you know, look to minimize terrorist activity. I think, you know, as I mentioned previously, it's the cultural impact of the PREVENT strategy that I've researched into, I've looked into, and I'm genuinely really concerned about the mental health impacts. You know, we've also got to look at the Muslim community from a social demographic lens, and sociologically speaking, as a minority group in the UK, as a religious minority, and as an ethnic minority as well, we're one of the poorest communities, one of the most underemployed communities, one of the least educationally achieving communities. And yes, there are pockets of our society, of our communities, that does achieve. And I can only hope and pray that that only increases. But we are living in deprived boroughs. And when you've got deprived group of people, majority deprived group of people who are oppressed through government strategy in schools, okay. They can't go access schooling in the same way. You know, we'll talk about equality of opportunity, but it's also about the equality of experience. And if Muslim students are going into state schools and feeling that they can't be Muslim, you know, there are studies that say if one is able to express their religious and ethnic identity, they're more likely to engage. So I think it's really suppressing Muslims across the board.
Thank you, Dr. Surya. If I go back to Dr. Musharraf. Dr. Musharraf, you mentioned something earlier, which I really want Rob to come back on and respond to. Now, you said that you were doing some work within Nottinghamshire regarding de-radicalisation. Can you briefly tell us about that work and what made it successful?
Well, my work actually started good 25 years ago, well before 9/11. And this was about interfaith work. This was about trust building. This was about getting the wider community to trust the Muslims and the Muslims to trust their own government, their own statutory bodies, their own country, their own neighbours, and to feel at home, really. No, it's been a long process and a long time. And, you know, there are independent groups and police who acknowledge this reality that when you have Muslim leadership that is doing the right things in the right way, the results are always good. Because we have very little extremism in Nottingham compared to some of the other nearby cities with the same size, same kind of demographic profile of the Muslims. Yet, why? Because the leadership did not want extremism, tackled it right on. It works. But that's, let me be honest, that matters nothing to the government. They are not interested in that now. We have now, sadly, have a government who's now slapping us on the face. Look, by appointing someone like this guy, it's just laughable. Would the Jewish community want somebody who long distance away was anti-Semitic? Would they let him do that? No, but with Muslims, they know they can get away with it. And that is why I think we must stop them from doing such silly things. But it's a sign of the fact that this government, and for the last 10 years, has got so wild that our children, I run a Muslim school and I know how Ofsted has treated our children and our teachers. Totally unacceptable. In which democracy would you do this? Not only that, but do you know that there's only 4 or 5 imams who are allowed to go onto national media? You talk about freedom, you talk about democracy. For 10 years, I've not been allowed to go onto BBC nationally. Why? I get a phone call from a researcher. Oh, we want to talk about this. Next day, they say, no, sorry, we've got someone else. This has happened. Now, these are very dangerous things because that is what the government has done. This government does not want Muslims to, be Muslims. It wants to gag us. It is actually taking our religious freedom. It is taking our religious freedom from us.
If I come back to Rob, Dr. Rob, if I ask you a question around de-radicalisation, so it seems that a problem exists because there wouldn't be a prevent strategy or a programme unless there was a problem, a root issue. Coming back to yourself and your work within education as a teacher, I wanted to ask you, so if you saw or witnessed maybe one of your students or somebody that you came across who was exhibiting behaviour that was abnormal, or they were mixing in a crowd that perhaps wasn't right for that individual. They were reading literature which seemed to be leaning really towards, I suppose, extreme literature in some way, shape or form. And we're not necessarily talking about Muslims. It could be those with, right-wing leanings as well. What would you do? I mean, how would you want it tackled? And how would you go about resolving that issue if there wasn't a prevent programme?
I'd firstly say that it would be much easier to resolve those issues without a prevent programme. And just talking to what Musharraf is talking about, I mean, he's clearly done some great work in Nottingham to help create a functioning civil society. And it is a functioning democratic civil society that solves these issues. Yasmin was talking about citizenship lessons, anti-racism, Musharraf's work, interfaith work, engendering trust between different communities. But no one's challenging that. And all of that stuff is absolutely necessary and is part of a functioning society. What I'm saying is that having a strategy whereby people are targeted by counter-terrorism to be reported to the police is never going to help that. And the reason it's not going to help that, and the reason I keep standing up against this idea of radicalisation of extremism, is that all of those things, citizenship lessons, anti-racism work, you can deliver all of them, and they are separate to having a radicalisation thesis. This is what Prevent is based on. Prevent is based on the theory, the pseudoscience, if you will, because there is zero scientific credibility to back this up. The idea that there is a knowable process of radicalisation that we can predict and intervene in. Now, that's clearly nonsense. It's just nonsense that you could put that thesis on individuals. What you can do is you can say to teachers, now, as you well know, there have been kids. There were kids that travelled from the school next to where I was teaching in Bethnal Green that travelled to Syria, and that was horrific. And what you can do is you can have conversations with teachers about that being a risk, and then you can address that risk. But let's stop talking about radicalisation because it just confuses the whole issue. We can have conversations about kids making racist proclamations. And we can address those issues. But again, let's drop the radicalisation thesis because it is nothing better than pseudoscience. It really isn't, and we need to move on from that. I just want to talk quickly, and I knew you wanted us to be quick about this, but
Sure.
I think Shawcross, his appointment it's clearly appalling, but it's also part of this kind of ongoing culture war of the right of the Conservative Party, who are in government at the moment. They want to stoke this kind of discontent. They want to see, sort of snowflake liberals and lefties, shouting from the rooftops about how terrible this is. Because what that means is that everyone's distracted by Shawcross rather than actually just talking about how awful Prevent is and how it needs to be stopped. And I'm so thankful that on this show we have spent a lot of time talking about Prevent rather than getting stuck talking about this awful appointment of Shawcross.
So, a question I have again to you, if you can give me a short answer, is: have you reached out to see whether his views have changed in any way since the days of Henry Jackson's Society?
To be honest, I'm not that interested in talking to Shawcross. I think that he is so discredited by his past, by the statements that he's made. I think CAREY alluded to the point that as the director of the Henry Jackson Society, I mean, the Henry Jackson Society is central to the industry of Islamophobia. That's what they do. That's their modus operandi. So his appointment is a slap in the face to anyone. And quite frankly, now that he's been appointed, there was the debacle of appointing Lord Carlisle, who was, because he was Prevent's biggest defender, he had to be removed by a judicial review. So the appointment of Shawcross indicates that this government, they've got zero interest in carrying out a reasonable review of Prevent. So, and make no mistake that with Carlisle's past associations with the Henry Jackson Society, this is just replacing one member of the old boys club with another member of the same club. So it is absolutely, and I'm very strong on this, it is absolutely no longer on the critics of Prevent to challenge the review. This is done. It's discredited already. So if supporters of Prevent, like organisations like Quillian, want to maintain the slightest veneer of credibility and good faith in their arguments for Prevent, it is incumbent on them to denounce this review for the sham that it so clearly is. It's critics of Brent are done here. Like, we don't need to talk about Shawcross. It's on them. If they want any credibility, they need to denounce it.
So, actually, what we didn't get a chance to talk about is the second in line for the job, which was Nazir Afzal. It would have been perhaps good to have a conversation around that as well, and kind of the reasonings behind why he even wanted to go for that role. I'd like to have final thoughts. One question to all of you, again, before we end the show. If we go to Dr. Surya. Dr. Surya, so we know there is an issue. We know that there is a problem. What is the alternative to Prevent in order to, I suppose, de-risk any potential of further attacks or further acts of terrorism in this country?
Well, in my view, I think any alternative needs to acknowledge that terrorism and extremism does not only exist with the Muslim community. I think that needs to be debunked, and that needs to be instilled in the culture of any such alternative from the get-go. Because if you have a strategy that is focusing on one community, then you're no doubt going to be alienating a whole community, causing discrimination within that community, and legitimizing Islamophobia. Let's just be honest and be frank, and it has legitimized Islamophobia. It's enabled closet Islamophobes to come out and criticize Muslims, and in line with Prevent guidelines to oppress Muslims.
So the same question to Yasmin Qureshi MP. OK, we'll go to Dr. Musharraf. Same question.
Well, I think we must mitigate the impact of Prevent, since we can't stop it. And the way to do that would be to ensure and to encourage Muslim police officers, for example, to work in the Prevent side. Muslim teachers, if in their school if they get the opportunity, they should be there so as they have that cultural intelligence, and they can make sure that the children are not damaged. And so I think we've got to mitigate those impacts. But I think the biggest thing we can do and we must do is actually to build that trust, win friends and alliances with like-minded people, and we really do expect our, the Labour Party and the Muslim members of the Parliament really to take this very, very seriously, because this is damaging democracy. This is damaging trust. And the Muslim community is possibly 4 million plus, 6 million by 2030, a community that is important. Very important part of this country. It is the peace-loving community, and that has to be recognized, that reality. And that is good for Britain. And that is, I think, the message we should be giving, our leadership should be giving all the time.
And I think we can't get hold of Yasmin Qureshi MP, so we're going to go to Dr. Rob Walker. Same question to you for your final thoughts.
So for an alternative to prevent is no prevent. I'm anti-prevent because I trust democracy. People who are speaking out in support of prevent have, I mean, to turn their language on them, have been radicalised against democracy. Remove prevent, allow people to speak out, allow people to be democratic citizens, allow kids to speak out in classrooms, allow people to speak to mental health professionals who've been silenced by prevent, and we will have a safer and more cohesive society.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Just once again, just to remind the viewers that we did try to contact representatives of the Home Office and William Shawcross to invite them to take part in the show, but we didn't receive a response. Now, this is what Priti Patel, the Secretary of State for the Home Department, said in a statement made on the 26th of January. Following an open competition to appoint a new independent reviewer of Prevent, I'm appointing William Shawcross to be the new independent reviewer of Prevent. Mr. Shawcross brings with him the necessary skills, experience and independence to carry out this review and provide recommendations to further develop our approach to supporting people vulnerable to being drawn in to terrorism in the future. Now, the appointment of Mr. Shawcross demonstrates our commitment to ensuring that the government's strategy for supporting vulnerable people to prevent them from being drawn into terrorism is as effective as possible in the future. Now, I'd like to thank all of my guests who participate in tonight's show. Thank you so much. And of course, you, the viewers, for staying with us for this show on the Prevent strategy. We'll be returning soon with a new topic on the review. Until then, good evening and stay safe.